Chuck, how would you compare and contrast the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq from your perspective?
It was interesting. I did Iraq. I was an advisor in Iraq, and then went to Afghanistan to be a advisor. And I assumed it was going to be a very similar. And I think I was probably a little surprised when I got to Afghanistan at how different it was
Yeah.
to Iraq. The Afghani people are not Arabs. They're very much of a warrior culture.
Mm.
It was much less civilized, much less, you just didn't have the structure, the roads, the power, the sewer, I mean, you had a couple cities, Kandahar, Kabul, but for the most of the country, it's very rural, very tribal, and they were warrior class people. They like to fight.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's the impression I get, that if it's springtime and the snow is starting to melt, then that's time to fight. And it kind of doesn't matter.
they'll
If
fight
it's
whether
the
we're there.
Russians
They'll
or-
fight the Russians, the Americans. They'll fight each other.
If the foreigners aren't there, then we'll fight each other.
There you
But,
go.
you know, it's springtime, so it's time to fight somebody.
Yes,
Is that kind of
that's the way I saw it.
how, that's the impression. That's the impression that I have. So you're saying that, I mean, Iraq, I mean, the pictures we look at from Iraq, most of them, you're in cities, and, not necessarily the most attractive cities, but, and you've got the electric grid
Yes.
can be pretty chaotic, but, at least you've got
It's there.
It's there. You've got roads and all this, paved roads and all this, but not much of that in Afghanistan.
No, it was very dirt roads.
Yeah.
A lot of what you call cob construction buildings made out of mud, straw, compacted together.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of rural farming. In the south, they had the poppy fields,
Right.
which was I struggled with a little bit. I mean, I looked at it and said, this is where much of the world's heroin's coming from. Why aren't we destroying this? And that's probably a bigger question.
What was the answer to that? Just this is how they're making their living, and so
So,
let's actually jump ahead while you're thinking
Okay.
about that. There's a photo, one of your photos here. You're in a poppy field there.
that was very early. I just got there. I was about a
Yeah.
week or two in there.
Yeah.
I didn't deploy with the 4th Brigade of the 82nd. The 4th Brigade of the 82nd started having some serious problems, toxic leadership and just some unfortunate things. They lost some leaders. So I called up infantry branch and said, I will go anywhere in the world in 72 hours, preferably Afghanistan. And they took me up on it. So off I went.
Yeah.
So I got there, that mission, actually, I did not have a radio. I did not have a pistol. As you can see, my holster is empty on my pistol. I had no communication. I ended up going to do battlefield circulation, and the sergeant major that was with my team quit. He didn't go, so I was me and a 19-year-old interpreter, flew on an Osprey, and the guy standing to my right was kind of leading the show. We ended up clearing a route from Marja to Nadali. But as I looked off across those fields, I was like, this is the world's heroin supply. This is not medical opiates. This gets turned in, and the Taliban makes money. Now, the individual little dirt farmer can make a whole lot more money growing poppies than he can wheat or some other. So I ended up in a meeting once where they were talking about the immigrants that came in to harvest the poppies and controlling that flow. And I said, why don't we not control the flow? Why don't we shut them off and let the poppies rot? And I had a Marine 06 colonel, I was a major, pulled me out and said, do not say that. And I said, why? He goes, that's levels above your pay grade.
Really?
And he kind of chewed my butt, and I kind of struggled with that.
So kind of the dilemma that on the one hand, this stuff is going to London and Paris and L.A. and wherever that heroin is going, which originates in those fields. But then you have the street level issue that this is how these people are making a living. If we take away their living, then we've just created a whole bunch of more.
They joined the Taliban and shoot us. So.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to some of the photos here. Tell us where you were in the
When
country.
I first got to Afghanistan, I got sent down to Marja. The Marines were doing the big clearing in South Afghanistan in Marja. I was in a place called Nadali. We were one 22-man advisor battalion, you could call it, with a brigade of Afghanis down there in Marja. At about 2 to 3 months into it, we got pulled from there. General Petraeus had taken over. We went up to Kandahar. And at Kandahar, the main effort at the time was to build a ring of security around Kandahar called the SRPF, the Security Ring Protection Force. That was supposed to be 2nd Brigade ANCOP, the guys I advised, with 1 battalion of Army Infantry, 4th Brigade, 82nd, I think it was 2nd Battalion, and make these checkpoints, and that's what we did. We surrounded Kandahar.
So originally you were south of Kandahar there?
Yes.
Okay.
Down in the poppy field. Lashkar Gah is where I was
oh, I see, yeah.
very close to.
Okay, so based southwest
Yes.
then of Kandahar. Let's look at some of your other photos here. What are we looking at in the background?
That was
there?
On the edge, very close to the Arghandab Valley. They grew. Arghandab was very bloody. There was a lot of IEDs, a lot of soldiers killed by IEDs, but there was, I believe what that was at certain times a year, the shepherds brought sheep in and corralled them in that area. That was my understanding of it.
Okay.
But yeah, that's just, I believe, just south of the Arghandab Valley.
Wow.
We went to look at some of the remote checkpoints, and that's doing battlefield circulation, myself and an Afghani brigade commander, Colonel Ghulam Muhadin.
You can just see how open that country is.
Yes.
And you say there are a lot of improvised explosive devices along that road there?
Yeah, that
which makes sense. You look at it, I mean,
because it's all dirt road.
Yeah.
Most of it.
Wow.
I think it was actually paved there, but a lot of dirt roads.
Let's see. What about this one?
Colonel Ghulam Muhadin was the brigade commander. He had actually fought on the side with the Russians when they were there.
Really?
When the Mujahideen
Mm-hmm.
won, he fled, went into Pakistan.
Oh.
And then when you see in the Arghandab, a lot of pomegranate orchards off behind us.
See,
That other picture was very close to there. But he was a very respected, I remember I worked directly under a Canadian one-star, and his saying was that all of Afghanistan, that they should make a kind of like the Superman doll of Colonel Ghulam Muhadin, that he should be an action figure, was what he said. He was highly respected by the Americans, just tough and fair, and a good commander.
Did you ever ask him why he fought on the side of the Soviets during the Soviet-Afghan War? Was it just that he was against the radicals, and whoever's fighting the radicals?
So he's college educated.
Yeah.
He was from the Kabul area. He wants a more modern Afghanistan,
Right. Okay.
which most of them, they don't think of themselves as Afghani. They think of themselves as whatever tribe they come from.
Pashtun
but-
or whatever. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and he wanted a more modern,
Yeah.
less. He was not a fan of the Taliban, the Mujahideen. Mujahideen.
And it is true. I mean, the Soviets did set up schools and things
Yes.
like that. So his view was, whoever's going to come here and help modernize this country, I'm with them.
Yes.
I'm against the radicals.
Yes.
The Mujahideen. I think the Mujahideen basically morphs into the Taliban,
It did.
right? Yeah, basically. That's it. Who are these? I see these guys in the background. Is that Afghan army there?
So what happened? No, those are Afghan ANCOP. So the ANCOP was an elite national police. They had the Afghani National Police, and then they had a couple of brigades of the elite. I think there were 3 brigades, and we were one of them. So they're just a little bit more selective and a little better equipped.
Did you feel? By the way, what year were you in Afghanistan?
2010.
2010. Did you feel confident? We were talking in a different discussion about Iraq, and it seems that you felt pretty confident that you could trust the guys, at least in your immediate circle. That group of guys back there, did you feel confident that you could trust them?
Yeah, and I don't know those guys from Adam's House Cat. What had happened there, I had just got to Afghanistan. We had, our ANCOP were in the south, in Helmand, in the clearing operation. There was a fairly large chunk of Afghanistan that was not cleared.
It was Taliban country?
Yeah, Taliban country. So Colonel Ghulam Muhadin had troops on both sides. and the only way he could get to the south side is if we transport him there. I just got to country. I was actually going there to be an operations officer. When they found out that the brigade of the 82nd didn't actually own me, I was there temporarily for their deployment, and I was going back to my, Fort Benning. They said, well, we're going to make you an executive officer on one of the SFAT battalions, which is an advisor battalion. I ended up taking over and became, so the commander I worked for, as soon as I got there, said, I'm going on home on leave. You're going to be in charge. I didn't know anything. He said, and then 2 days from now, you're going to do battlefield circ. The sergeant major knows everything, he'll take you. Well, he went on leave and the sergeant major quit. So.
Meaning retired or?
No, he quit. He just
said, I'm done with
said,
this.
I'm not going. I'm going to sit in my room and watch movies.
Yeah.
So there was the unit had some issues.
Sounds like it.
Definitely at the field grade officer level, things that to this day disappoint me that I did not expect to see. There was toxic leadership at the top, and it had bled down, and so I volunteered to go, knowing that, and I just said, soldiers need the best leadership they can get. I'm gonna go there and be the best leader I can.
Yeah.
Well, so I meet Colonel Ghulam Medin. We fly in on an Osprey.
Yeah.
I was still jet lagging a little bit, and we get to a Marine base, and they said, we didn't even know you were coming. So Camp Leatherneck, a little dusty outpost, and he got a little miffed. He goes, well, I don't need you to carry me around. I got my guys down here. So I jumped on a little pickup truck, a little Ford pickup truck, and off we went to the chagrin of the Marines because they had no visibility on me. I had no radio. I had no comms. I was just out cowboying it up with the Afghanis, which probably wasn't smart. I had somewhat trust in him very quick, but just, I don't know, not to be preachy.
Yeah.
I'm kind of an old-fashioned Bible-believing Christian, and the good Lord has the say-so when I go and when I don't. And I don't know, that's always kind of in the forefront of my mind, so I generally don't tend to stress out a whole lot of what's going to or not going to happen. But we did battlefield circulation for 3 or 4 days. He went and talked to his commanders that he couldn't normally talk to, had brought some supplies. When we went back to the Marine compound, they kind of chewed my butt and says, hey, don't be running around the country without us knowing where you're at. And so I roger that. And then they told us it's going to be another week or 2 before we can fly him back. Well, he got mad about that and said, I can't stay. I got a brigade to command. So he thought on it. He said, I'm going to do a clearing mission. I'm going to call in 2 of my battalions, and we're going to clear the route from Marja to Nautilus and expect it to be heavily mined and all that. He goes, you wait, and in 2 weeks from now, you get a flight back. And I was like, nah, I'm going with you. And he kind of laughed. He's like, I can't take you. You're just one lone American. I said, well, tell your guys that I have the ability to call in American helicopters, which I didn't. And he's like, okay. Well, he put me in a Humvee, armored Humvee. He had a couple of them. And he said, do not get out of this Humvee. And we cleared the route all the way back. He was literally in the front of the action. I remember, for a 50-year-old man, he could run. He would run those roads and jump down in the culverts, checking, and they cleared quite a few IDs. There was a little bit of skirmish in a few places, but we cleared the route. I remember when I got a vehicle, I felt like a turd, because I wanted to be up front with the action. But he's like, you go with me. I got to protect you. I can't get an American killed. When we finished it, he picked me up and shook me. He was laughing. And the next day, we were on their national television as this big operation have cleared. Wow. The governor of Helmand came and met us. I got to eat some meals with the higher ups. And then, so after that, he started doing battlefield circulation, and he took me with him, and he would tell the story of the American here trusted me so much. He didn't even have Americans. And I went out without a weapon and my body armor sometimes, and I would get out of their vehicle, and it was like his motivational speech. And then I would speak, and my interpreter laughed. He's like, these bastards don't even know what I'm saying because there's some tribal group from up on the northern border, and he said so many of these different groups speak different languages. He said, but they can tell we're happy. So we were just kind of winging it.
You're out on this operation, but you weren't armed? Or you
the first one I was, but on some of the battlefield, I would just leave my weapon in the vehicle. I mean, it's not like me by myself with one M16 that's going to do a whole lot to anything. If they decided they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you.
You've used the term battlefield circulation. Just
so a commander has a chunk of ground. So if say I'm a brigade commander, my brigade is spread out to a large, throughout my command, I want to go out and see the company commanders. So when you're out and about, and there's a lot of traveling, there's a lot of in bad guy country. So a commander wants to do battlefield circulation. So basically his battlefield circulation was cut in half. He had this middle ground that he couldn't go through. We cleared that middle ground, which enabled him. And And he always, for the rest of my year there, it's like I could do no wrong. I was the guy that went by myself with him, and
is that what you did for your year? Just kind of.
Oh, so yeah, for
just you and the Afghans.
And so I started doing that, and I don't advise it to other people. Probably what's smart is I would go out with him by myself. I just I didn't see a whole lot of need of getting guys on a team killed in an area they didn't need to be. That he knew the ground, the terrain, the people. I would travel in his light-skinned vehicles, and
now, did he speak English, or did you have an
enough.
interpreter with you?
I had an interpreter. Had very good interpreters. They're tough. They, like I said, they're a tougher people. They're not Arabs. They're a different class, a different group of people.
It's a tough history, that's for sure. We talked about this photo. Here, I just noticed some of the terrain.
So that was one of his little outposts. He's got guys that are, there's not even a roof there. They're pulling security at probably a road intersection or whatever. Yeah, it's some very treacherous. And this isn't a treacherous terrain. This is in the south. This is. It's not up there in the Hindu Kush Mountains.
Hindu Kush, exactly. You hear about that.
And I never served up in there, but I had a lot of buddies that did.
What's going on here?
We were doing battlefield circulation. I was out there with them, and if you see what the walls are made out of.
Looks
what
like
that is,
some kind of brick.
It's a box. It's a box made out of a cloth with like hog wire fence. And that box is probably 8 feet wide, 8 feet by 8 feet. So you stack those boxes, and then you use a loader, and you fill them full of dirt. So what they did is they made a small cave, and then they stacked those boxes. They got timbers across the top. They made a cave, and then they've got a car battery with some lights. Everywhere the Afghanis go, they take rugs. So this dirt little cave very quickly turned into a little area of the rugs. They had some propane cookers, and they cooked rice, beans, tomatoes, and I was the only American guy, and I stayed with some of his commanders. After a while, you just tell your interpreter, stop interpreting, you wear them out, and you just
hang out.
They talked shop.
Wow.
And I spent the night, couple nights in that dirt cave there.
And you never felt like, I mean, you always certainly felt like you could trust the guy there on your right.
I was confident. He had his cousin, it was interesting, one of his bodyguards. His cousin's family was going to kill him, the cousin, because he had squandered the family's wealth on gambling and prostitutes. Yeah. So Gul Amin brought him in and said, he's not very smart, but he's tough. And he assigned him to me as kind of my bodyguard. And I never saw him sleep. He was there for like a week. I literally never saw him close his eyes. And when I would sleep, if you open an eye, he'd be standing there watching me. And everywhere I went, he watched me. So
good bodyguard. What's the story here?
Okay, this was a strange day. I was going from a meeting, going from one meeting to another, and there was a truck stop, just a dirt parking lot, and there was about 3 or 4 Afghanis just beating it was one Afghani, they were standing in a circle, just beating the snot out of him with a stick. And I pulled up in there. I remember General Petraeus, when I was in Iraq, said, you don't let sectarian violence happen. And the guys on my team that I take were kind of like, what are we going up in here? I was like, well, there's violence going on. Well, we don't care. And these are my American. And then I had the Afghani police. And like, why are we stopping here? I was like, go rescue this guy. So we rescued him. I took him to a British outpost. And we asked the guy that was beating, why are you beating this guy? And he said, well, it was a couple years ago, his brother beat up my brother. And we're like, yeah, but why are you beating him up? And the Iraqi police were like, he just told you, or the Afghani police, he just told you, his brother. And I was like, yeah, but that doesn't involve these two. And they're kind of like, somebody beats up your family member, you go beat up their family members.
So there's kind of a variation on the tribal thing.
Yeah, I was like, well, we're not going to let this happen. We're going to transfer him somewhere else so he doesn't get beat to death. And they looked at me like I was a little bit crazy, but I couldn't just leave the guy there and let him get.
So this photo, this doesn't have anything really to do with the war.
No, it was just a picture.
Personal.
I took the picture back and gave it to Colonel Muad'Din and told him the story and said, he looked at me like I was crazy too. It was like, yeah, this is Afghanistan. People beat each other up.
They do this kind of thing. What comes to mind? I mean, this is a great photo. I mean, this is a National Geographic kind of photo here. But what comes to mind when you look at this one?
We had to find, when we went up to Kandahar, we had to find, I guess you'd say, living quarters for our checkpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And we were out looking for different empty buildings that we could set up, and there was a little shop that sold produce and some canned goods and all this.
Mm-hmm.
This little boy was entrusted by his family to run the shop.
Wow.
He looked a little nervous when all of a sudden this entourage, and they were less trusting of Americans. I never interacted with them. I just stand back and watch.
Mm.
Well, what was funny is when we walked in there, Colonel Ghulam Muaddin, the Afghani colonel I advised, started asking him questions, and I knew what he was asking. He's asking him mathematical questions. He had the guy doing math, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and every time he got right, he paid him money. And the kid basically drained Colonel Ghulam Muaddin's wallet by getting the questions right.
Wow.
And he paid him quite well, and it was hot. We stood in the shade, and they bought me some little orange flavored drink there, one of the bodyguards, and I just took a picture of him and
Yeah.
made a pretty good picture.
Huh. Let's see. This is an article. By the way, I just want to go. A thought I had was you were describing this Afghan colonel and how he had fought with the Soviets and now he was helping the Americans. Probably not so much because he loved the Soviets or he loved the Americans, but that he did want a good future for Afghanistan, which means coming into the modern world. And so, what you just said sort of fits that, right? That he's testing this kid on his math,
Yes.
and just sort of emphasizing education. Just the other day, I snipped this article out of the Wall Street Journal, and we still have here we are in late 2018. We still have troops in Afghanistan. The Taliban seems to be taking a lot of territory back, and it's hard to read, but basically you can see the headline that a vote in the country was delayed. You've got a lot of explosions and attacks, etc., taking place in the country. I asked a similar question in relation to Iraq, but when you think about Afghanistan, do you think that this Afghan colonel's dream of Afghanistan joining the modern world, do you think that can ever happen? I mean, is there just something in this culture that just says, the world can do what it wants, but we're not joining?
Yeah, I foresee them to stay in their tribal mentality. I foresee them, it's interesting. They sit on the world's largest reserves of lithium. And at a time when we're talking solar power and all that, that lithium could be mined, and they could be somewhat similar to Kuwait. They could just about pay their civilians money just for being Afghani, and I don't foresee them doing that. They're gonna grow their watermelons and their pomegranates, and gonna have their little tribe, and they're gonna have their sheep and their goats, and you literally build a school somewhere, and they go blow the school up. They didn't want education. They didn't want doctors. They didn't want teachers. They want their tribal. And it depends on the area. Now, I think there's a little enclaves. Kandahar is going to be fairly modern and whatever. Kabul, the same way. But most of the rural areas, they're going to...
So, I mean, that's hard for Americans to believe. The folks show up and say, here's air conditioning, here's modern medicine, here's literacy. Seems pretty obviously good, but it seems like a lot of folks in this country just don't have interest in.
They have a very unique, brand of Islam, and they're a very backwards culture or tribal culture, and they seem pretty content to keep it that way.
How does it... what are your thoughts when we kind of realize that, let's just focus on Afghanistan, that for all of the time and effort, the U.S. went in there in 2001, I think, right? Not long after 9/11. After all this time, after all this energy, after all this money, after all these lives, that it's really unlikely that 10 years from now, Afghanistan's going to be much of a different place. When you hear that, just what comes to mind?
You know, I look at, so when we originally went there, when and why, 9/11 had happened. The Al-Qaeda had trained inside of Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was inside of Afghanistan. My understanding, so we're going in there to break that up. We're not going to let this be the training ground for Al-Qaeda, and we're going to get Osama bin Laden. That happened. We've done that. We've broke that up. Now, if you start looking at doing nation building, and I'm not the smartest guy out there, so I'm fairly sound at tactical and operational level stuff. The strategic level is not my ball game, but I try to have an understanding. So when I ask myself right now, if we've got U.S. troops there, we've got a mission there, what is the end state? What is success? And when we've reached that end state, I don't know what that is, and there probably is one. Just not what I know. If you ask my opinion, is it going to be a peaceful voting elections and a democratic run Afghanistan? I don't think so. I think it's going to be the same Afghanistan, and we staying there because we need a kickoff for a jumping place for Iran or whatever. I don't know. That's not my level of thinking, and if it is, then maybe that makes sense. But
do you think something, I mean, one of the things that might be going on, if we think about we've still got troops there, is just the idea that we've invested so much that we can't stand the idea of that investment, not seeming like it came to something, and so we're going to keep investing to make sure that we didn't lose our investment.
Sounds logical. I
think that's kind of thing that happened in Vietnam, right?
Yep. No, I know. Like I said earlier on, I knew what the goal there was.
It was clear early on, wasn't it? Yeah.
But now it's not clear to me anymore.
Yeah.
I left there in 2010, so you're talking 8 years ago. I don't know what's going on now, and
we've still got troops there.
Still got troops, and
I don't know that there's a whole lot of the U.S. forces are getting into a whole lot of fighting, but some, and you still got the IDs, etc. Let's just end up with this, and we had a discussion about your time in Panama, the Operation Just Cause, 1989, 1990, Iraq, Afghanistan. Of course, your military career of 29 years is much more than those three operations. So just as you look at those photos there, the guy on the left at that point is maybe 21, something like that?
Yep, that was about 21.
About 21. Guy on the right, are you a lieutenant colonel by that point?
That was senior major, so I was born in 68, 78, 88, 98. I was well into my 40s then.
Okay, yeah. So, so you've got a long military career here with a lot of experience, a lot of different kinds of experience. What's the big thing? A big thing. I'm sure there are a lot of things. What's a big thing that you've taken away from your time in the service, other than the obvious benefits and things like that? But in terms of like life, life lessons or something like that, what's the big thing you've taken away from your 29 years in the Army?
It was definitely it wasn't a right to serve. It was a privilege. It's not I've heard people say that being in the Army, that's a form of socialism. No, it's not a form of socialism. You're there for the to provide protection at the heart of it, at the core of it. And I kind of figured that out very early on as an officer. I don't think I knew it as much. And this is, you raised your right hand, and said, "I do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." That is the meat and potatoes. That is what I'm doing. And if it doesn't relate to that, then I probably shouldn't be doing it. Mm-hmm. And I put that as the foundation, as the umbrella overhead is the Army's mission. I am there to fight and win America's wars. Now within that, there's generally three kind of levels of the tactical, the operational, and then the strategic. That everything I do somewhere fits into one of those three. My level, it's the tactical and operational. I have pretty good understanding. The strategic's above my pay grade. And I always wanted to look at myself as a filter of whatever order I get, that I have to look at it. Is it constitutional? Is it tactical, operational, or strategic? Does it help me fight and win America's wars? Mm-hmm. And if it didn't do that, it's not something I was willing to take part in. I will say I got a little disheartened. I probably would still be serving today. I could have served another 6 or 7 years till I would have probably limited out as a lieutenant colonel. That towards the end, we started getting directives. We started getting orders. We started doing things that, when I looked at my oath to the Constitution, when I looked at the Fight and Win America's Wars, I wasn't comfortable with. The mandate that every military post will do LGBT pride events. So every soldier, from the soldier that today raised his right hand, took an oath, to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, every single one of us is a byproduct of procreative sex between a man and a woman. We have no celebration for that. We celebrate one man sodomizing another, which is literally LGBT. We celebrate a man having his testicles cut off, his genitals mutilated, and then we pretend he's a woman. Is that tactical, operational, or strategic?
Right. I see what you're saying.
How does that fight and win America's wars?
It feels like, it seems like you're saying, I mean, external politics, external political interests getting into the military, and
because that's neither
draining time and energy and resources from the military's central mission.
So when I go back to that, I do solemnly swear to support and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Everybody knows what a foreign enemy is. What's a domestic? You know, if we said, you know, Chuck Pudil here decided that, you know, he's no longer supportive of that Constitution, and not only does he not support it, he doesn't like it, so he's going to start an underground group, and I'm going to blow up bombs in the Pentagon and other places to subvert the Constitution. Well, there's a real guy that did that. His name was Bill Ayers, and we had a president of the United States declared his run for the Senate seat in that man's house. And I looked at all it, and I'm not a politician, and it's not my job to get into the politics, but when I started looking at directives and orders, and, you know, you're going to celebrate LGBT and you're going to give free leave for people to get, and I said, I can't be part of this. And I was a little disappointed because it wasn't my job to fight it. It's the chairmen of the Joint Chiefs. It's the guys with the 4s and the 3s and the 2 stars that are the kind of the buffer between us and the politicians to stand up and say, is this helping us fight and win?
Right.
Giving a man hormone blockers does not make him to where he can be on a company outpost in rural, you know, and cover that distance between him and an enemy and engage.
Right.
And if you can't do that, then why are you in the Army? Why are you in the Marine Corps? Why?
Right, and, you know, it's kind of a, you know, what I'm hearing you saying is, you know, whatever the policies are, if these policies are draining time, energy, and resources from the Army's central mission, then that's not what the Army should be doing.
It's time for the leadership to relook.
Yeah.
And I'll say, you know, I'm not perfect. Got my own faults and flaws, but I'm proud from day one as a private till the day I retired as a lieutenant colonel that oath remained at the forefront. That I never gave orders that I can't, you know, that didn't fall within that fight and win. That I tried to live by the Ranger Creed, the Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, honor, integrity, personal courage. And I'm proud of that. I'm 100% disabled. I've got quite a few injuries. I didn't realize it until the end of how many injuries and, you know, separated shoulders and screw in the left wrist and 3 herniated discs and that stuff stacks up. But I don't have an ounce. I don't believe I have one single drop of PTSD. I have no post-traumatic stress. I've seen men shot up close. I've seen Americans and enemy soldiers die. I've seen blood on the back. I've seen things you don't forget. But I have no stress from it. I have a clear conscience of every action I did in the military. If there's, you know, maybe ways in which I could go back and redo a tactical, I might do it different, not because I did it immorally, because I see a smarter way or, you know, leadership. But I'm very proud of the fact that I got to serve. Very proud I've got a brother that had 5 combat deployments. All my brothers served, and so I'm very blessed to have been able to serve as long as I did and to take part in the operations I was in.
Sure. Well, I really am grateful for you coming and spending time here, telling us about some of your memories. Appreciate it very much.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.